We'll give people a couple of minutes. Yes.
So that's maybe following what we did yesterday. If you share your screen so we can see the pointers, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I'll make changes if I need to.
Perfect. Let me just get that up. See shows. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
I can't see the obviously the kind of response and stuff. So just shout or something more. You can. Yeah, let's do a couple. As a general update, like I said, I can't see any sort of attendee members and stuff, but for those that have joined, what the aim is really is we've taken on board. So this is the Jarek's workflow diagram that it created, which is fantastic. And then we've had input from various people within groups in terms of commenting. And then Jarek and I sort of sat down with another meeting yesterday just to try and pick some of these things up. And what we're aiming to do is to basically walk us through the sort of workflow diagram and ensure that we've got the sort of facts correct, whether there are any. And then what we've done is, as we go through this, there are some kind of yellow items which are questions that we have, which we need input from others. So these kind of ones here. Again, the aim really is to make sure we've got the facts correct and the workflow correct. Visually, we will, work on that afterwards. So I'm not so worried about the visual aspects, but the aim being that we want to end up today with a guide that allows people to kind of go, okay, if they're starting from the top here, allows them to figure out whether their project, whether it's a refurb or a new build or something, falls within to the kind of the gateway process or not. Yeah. And then the consequences of that and the various sort of workflow processes that they need to go through to essentially get to the end, which is to be able to occupy the building, whatever that may be. So that's the kind of aim for today. I'm just wondering how many, just, whether did you get a notification how many people kind of are able to join today? And do you think we need to wait any longer, or should we just sort of crack on?
Probably get moving, Jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have thought so.
And people on the team on the call, please shout out in case we've got something wrong or anything else. So, okay, well, look, basically I'm going to sort of click on things like this just to kind of show where we are. But essentially, the aim is that if we starting here, and then the aim really is to establish if the building must go through the gateway process. So what we've done, I'll just zoom in a bit more, is we've sort of asked a question in this area here. Is it existing in occupation building? And then these sort of diagrams here, or these nodes, one thing to note, or I should have said that before, is that on the left-hand side, Jarek has kind of got his sort of symbols and the key for it. We'll move that into a readable place once we know which symbols are specific to this workflow. But the X here, this X symbol, it means like an exclusive sort of decision making. So it's either a yes or a no. So it's a building occupation at the moment. If you go to the left, which is no, then, and we're assuming therefore it's new build. Now, these little blue things here are essentially links, hyperlinks. So what Jarek's done is he sort of embedded hyperlinks. If I click on that, for example, then this guidance comes through. And so wherever you can see a little link like that, it means that if you click on that kind of government logo, it takes you to that. So what we've tried to do is to kind of identify the kind of key takeaways from that link and put it here. So is the building at least 18 meters in height or have at least 7 stories, etc. And that's the height criteria, generally speaking. And again, there is a link here, which is quite useful, which I'm sure most of you have seen, because it includes the diagrams which the government have sort of put out. So if I just scroll down, you have all these diagrams to help everyone ensure that they're kind of measuring the number of stories or counting the number of stories or counting the height in the correct way. So that's the kind of aim as we go through the presentation. So if it's clearly a new building and it's falls within the height category, you would, or let's say it doesn't, so you go through to no, and that's the end of that process in terms of whether it's defining from a high risk building. If the answer is yes in terms of the height, then there are the need to look at it from the use class. You know, what is it used for? Residential care home, hospital. And again, if the answer to that question is no, then you kind of have a further set of questions. And then depending on the answer for that, if it's yes, then that's the end of the process. And if it's no, then it goes into the building can be considered a high risk building. So that is the workflow, let's say on the left-hand side, i.e. for a new build project. I won't talk through every single kind of one of these questions, but that is where we believe it's if it falls within the height, it falls within the use categories, then it needs to be considered a high risk building. If you go to the right, and now any general questions or queries on, please shout out. Like I said, I can't see any hands raised or anything on my little view here. So Jarek or Richard or someone or anyone in the call, just please shout out if you see something which is wrong predominantly, and that's the main feedback we want.
We will let you know if there is a hands raised or something.
Thank you, Jarek. So that's, I think, dealing with the left-hand side. So that's primarily dealing with new building. If the answer to that first question, is it an existing sort of building that's been occupied? Yes. Then there is a slightly different criteria. Again, the hyperlink is there. Slightly different to the new build in terms of, from what we can see, it's to do with the kind of use class. So again, we've tried to deal with it from a height point of view. So again, if it falls within the height and it's an existing building, and the answer is yes, then you get asked a second question. And that is this question. So will the project or the work that you're doing make it into a high risk building, for example? And so that's kind of the first question. So if it's yes, then again, the question about the use class kicks in. And from what we can see, the main difference really is that the care home and the hospital, if it's a refurb or an existing building, if it falls into that, then actually you don't have to go through the gateway process. That seems to be that's our understanding. Now we may be correct or not, but that seems to be what the government is sort of saying. Again, so if you go through, yes, it's 18 meters, or it'll make it into it.
Sorry, Baz.
Sorry, Jared.
I've noticed that question is in the wrong place, so I have to amend this. It doesn't make sense. Because the answer should be no, but we can't have two no's answers on exclusive gateway. So I will revise this bit to make sense because it's illogical. Okay. Fine.
But I think what we understood is that if it's within the height and if the answer is yes, but it's being used for these use classes,
but the previous question, if you answer if the building is at least 18 meters long or 7 stories, then this following question, will the proposed work result in a building becoming at least, is kind of redundant.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess the point here, I think that we were looking at was if the yeah, I guess if it's no,
Yeah, and then I should go
then
back
yeah.
to yes.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. We've had some really useful feedback from Mo as well, from some knowledge that he has from some documentation that he's working with, which will, I think, will help us fill in some of the gaps as well, because the document that he has is essentially a text-based Word document of this workflow. And obviously what we're trying to do in this little group is to create a diagram rather than a text that's read. So we're trying to present the information in a different way so that someone can simply follow it in their finger and get to the answer. So we think that'll be useful as a tool. So while Jarek is kind of working on that, essentially the aim here is to kind of identify again whether it's now one of the questions that we had is in terms of refurbishment work. So when I was listening to the HSC webinars, which were a couple of months ago, they talked about the fact that if you're doing sort of refurbishment works or within, say, bathrooms or kitchens, or the work is self-certified, like say from Corgi, the kind of gas specialist, then you don't need to apply for don't need to apply for building control approval, etc. Now that's what I picked up from the webinar from the HSC. Again, it'll be useful to understand whether we've got that correct. What I'm aware of is that if you're doing obviously work in the communal areas of an existing, let's say 10-story building, then you do need to, because you're likely to affect things like fire doors or detection, etc. So that question there, I think is correct, but we may need to phrase that more accurately. Again, don't know if anyone's had any feedback on that, but so the idea of that this top half is essentially to determine whether the project that you're working on, whether it's a new build, refurb, amendment to an existing building, leads you to the path of it needing to be considered a high-risk building and therefore go through the gateways. Where the process is ending, it doesn't mean that obviously you don't have to apply for building control, etc. But what we're trying to identify here is whether the aim of this initial workflow is to figure out whether your building needs to go through the gateways. Any questions on that so far from anyone? Okay, just carry on. And obviously we'll share the links again to this so we can get some final outputs. I think what we'll do, probably Jared thinking aloud, is that we may have another little session and then essentially issue this as some sort of PDF so that it's rather than having people having to log in or anything, it might make it more accessible for feedback from the wider teams. And Richard, and we'll share that, Richard, with yourself, so then you can share that with the other groups as well. I think that might get more engagement rather than a link. I'm thinking.
Sounds good.
Easy to engage, okay. So yeah, if the building is considered a high risk building, then so the client, notify the client, and then this sort of side bit here, and this is I think you've added this in overnight, I think as well, Jarek, haven't you? Where this sort of, don't know if you want to kind of quickly talk about that right hand side, but that's more about setting up the OIRs and AIRs, etc. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that information is based on ISO 19650 information management for delivery and operation phase of the project. So I've plugged it in because it's relevant, because we're supposed to have this golden thread of information that's part of it. So I try to capture what the requirements and deliverables are for specific teams. So that part is for the client. So at that point, if the client has been notified that you need to be that the building or project he's planning is to be considered as high risk building, then he should plug it in that requirements and consider those requirements when creating appointment requirements. And also that will would influence the organizational requirements and so on, which will have impact on the project itself or operation of the asset.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess this thing is it's sort of, we mustn't forget some of the other things that we've talked about, which is things like the ISO 19650, the BIM sort of maturity level 2. They're all kind of part and parcel of that kind of golden thread, which is obviously a requirement of one way to demonstrate it. So once the client has sort of been notified, we've kind of got these sort of 3 branches down here, and 2 of them are. So in terms of if I go to the far left one, which is building regulations.
So sorry, Das, to barge in again.
Yeah.
Did you talk about this yellow decision point about refurbishment in bathrooms?
Yeah, what I talked about was that my understanding is just this item here.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if anyone in the team has any experience of that, but it may be something that we definitely need to get clarity on from others. I think just generally the wider team. But our understanding is that if let's say it is a 10-story building, but the work is limited to within the apartment, and you're doing works, so let's say replacing a kitchen or bathroom or getting your electrics checked, then it doesn't need to be it doesn't need to go through the gateway process. That's our understanding, so that's why we kind of put it in there. But again, I don't know if anyone in the call may know differently or have experience. But again, that's something we can. I think what we'll probably have to do, Jarek, is maybe put our question mark symbol so it's clear as to where we've got holes in our understanding as well when we share it. So if I move on to then so once the client is notified, then you've got this sort of one branch, which is regulations. Again, there's a hyperlink. We put a hyperlink in there, and that takes you to the online, the digital collated all the regulations. Just because we're mindful that if with the competency requirements, you're not going to know every single change to the building regulation documents or the approved documents. So the best way that we do in our office, for example, is just make sure everyone looks at the digital government link rather than downloading anything which may become out of date. So we thought that would be helpful just to put the gov.uk website for all of the approved documents. So you're looking at the right documents and the most up to date. And the question we've asked them is, has building regulations changed? So, we've got Part B that's just changed in terms of, or as an amendment that came out regarding the 2 staircases. So to that question, if the answer is no, then obviously ensure compliance with building regulations. If the answer is yes, then obviously assess the impact on the design or the works that have been carried out, ensure compliance. And if you have achieved it, great. If not, then obviously you have this sort of feedback loop. So you go round and round until you have. And then if it's yes, then that we've kind of got feeding in to the kind of information that will be submitted for the Gateway 2 process, for example. So in order to get that certification, as well as what we've got now, we're going down to Gateway 3, so for completion. So that's sort of like a one workflow, which is to do with building regs. I think that's fairly clear in that sense. Yeah. Then you've got the Fire Safety Act. Again, probably need some help from the wider team and the fire specialist, because what we understand is with the Fire Safety Act, maybe Jarek, one thing here is we could add the link to the Fire Safety Act web page as well from the government. And the overall one for the Building Safety Act, I guess, as well, just to keep that same consistency. So the Fire Safety Act, again, not the expert on this, but to implement fire safety measures, the duty holder needs to look at assess the risk, use fire assessment. So again, I think we would welcome input from the fire specialist teams about this element. But again, our understanding is that, and I think you've added this little bit in here as well, Jared, this team, design team response bit.
Sorry, yeah, that's so part of the process, and I think I put this in the right place. Just before Gateway 2, the design team would be engaged in the project, and they have to respond with specific, the specific response, the deliverables, which is the information delivery plan, which also needs to be part of the golden thread and information. That's why I put it there. And so I just tried to make it more relevant, because the symbols before we had it grouped and it wasn't really good. So I think that makes more sense.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes, and then we can share. And again, what I don't know 100% is, does all of this information and going through this process have to go into, you know, I think it would make sense to go into Gateway 2, or whether actually this is a process that also feeds into Gateway 3 and beyond, i.e. doing occupation.
I think both. It's just I literally did it, finished working on it 5 minutes before this meeting. Brilliant. So it's not finished yet, basically.
No, because my understanding is with this, the Fire Safety Act is, yeah, it's that kind of, obviously when you had the existing buildings, they had to be registered. Now all of that period is finished now. So this requires that kind of continual assessment, isn't it, of the building, doing the risk assessments, etc. So I believe this whole process feeds into Gateway 2, Gateway 3, and the life cycle of the building, as far as I understand it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the final one is the kind of the key workflow, which is really the major workflow in many ways, is the it's just, if I move to the left here a bit, it's the Building Safety Act. So and then again, I'm not an expert on this defective premises review of insurance and stuff, so I think I need a little bit of guidance about that in terms of how do these work and what do we need to do in terms of those. So I'm not 100% sure on those, Jared, but I know you've kind of got the arrow going to back to, so from the building safety defective premises review of insurance regulation, that feeding back into the feedback loop for the
because this is part of the client's responsibility, so I guess he should be reviewing the requirements following the Building Safety Act and the decision tree so far.
Yeah, I think that'll be useful for us to understand. And maybe we can make some of these arrows kind of, I don't know, different color so that it's easy to see that they're a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the fire safety and the defective premises, that's not something I'm 100% clear about personally. And then final thing, yeah. So essentially, in terms of the Building Safety Act, so we've established that the building is a high risk building. Couple of notes here in the sense of that the building safety regulator is sort of now under the kind of the HSE, and they will act as the building control body for all high risk buildings. From the information I actually got from Mo yesterday, apparently if you've got a high risk building and a non-high risk building, you know, within the same development, you can theoretically go to the BSR or the local authority or someone else for the non-high risk building, or you can ask for both projects to be under the new regulator. So that was quite interesting. Again, we sort of get feedback on the pros and cons of that. One thing that we and so basically the bottom line is that you cannot have an approved inspector or the local authority being your building control for high risk buildings. It must be the building safety regulator, and they will nominate and appoint the relevant people with the relevant I think you have different grades now in terms of building control, the improved inspectors, depending on the complexity of the project, there are different grades. One thing we had as a question was material change of use and any work rate to higher cause it to cease to be such a building. Kind of a funny one, I guess, because if you've already got a 7-story, but you're demolishing or taking away a floor, does that then still need to go through the gateway process? I don't really know how often that scenario will occur, or the change of use. So if it's a residential at the moment, but you're turning it into, let's say, a commercial fit out, how does that thing? So again, I don't know if anyone on the call has had that experience or know of anything, but of these two. So anything that the project does to take it away from a high risk building, do you still have to go through the gateways? So yeah, I think we'll put another question mark next to this one as well. We'll identify them somehow more clearly, I guess. Jared, we can work on that in the background. The Building Safety Act then obviously brought a couple of new bodies into things. So there was the National Regulated Construction Products. Again, we put a link to the most relevant thing that we can find. And then the New Homes Ombudsman, again, a link to that. And then this one, the Architects Registration Board, we put a link to, I think at the moment it says the RIBA have like a list of registered architects who have sort of deemed themselves to be able to do the Building Safety Act PD role. So we've kind of put a link to that. I'm sure that'll evolve and change. And then the registered building control advisors, there's a list for England and there's a list for Wales. And so again, we put those links in here. So then we're kind of moving on to the fact of Gateway 1. So the first gateway. So this is fire statement and the HSC or the Building Safety becomes is a consultee at the Gateway 1. So what we understand from that is that there are at the moment these sort of planning advice portals. So it's almost like a free app service to understand what do you need to submit about your project, or if you've got any questions about, the aim of this gateway is really to ensure that the design team and the client have thought about how, let's say, what is the fire strategy for the building? How does the emergency services come and access it? So making sure that the design has thought about and has a strategy for dealing with, in a risk of a fire. So we put in a couple of links here that we found. One is the government planning advisory one, and then the Planning Gateway 1 dedicated email address for where you can email your queries. And there's meant to be a 21-day max response time. And the Building Safety Regulator statutory consultee during the planning determination. So that's the kind of the key change there. So we understand the workflow being you've got to submit registration with the accountable person. We've got a figure of 251, but again, not 100% sure, hence why we put it in yellow, whether that's the current rate or does it change depending on the size of the building or the project. So again, if anyone's got any thoughts on that, that'd be great. And then we put a link in for, which is issued by the government about the fire safe statement form that must be submitted, which asks some of these questions about the project and the building. And we also had that there is a 28-day period for feedback on that, or for them to come back and ask for more details to be submitted. So again, that's what we currently have, but we put a question mark in there in the key building information. Now, Jarek, the thing I did read in the one that Mo sent through was whether this key building information, what I read in his one was that this is required also after the building has been registered at the end after Gateway 3. So I don't know whether this little bit is in the wrong place. But what I read from his documentation was that where was it?
But it needs to be submitted before Gateway 2. So if I understood you correctly, you said it needs to be resubmitted or confirmed or what? What did you
because
mean?
it talks about in the document that Mo shared, it talks about
Maybe that's the reason.
that there is 28-day period. I'll find it and I'll share that with you.
Also,
saying,
let's check, and then if any one of you have any comments on this, that would be helpful as well, please.
yes. Yeah, because we talked about the need for sorry, just having a look at my notes here. Yeah, it talks about within 28 days of submission of the building registration to the building safety regulator, the principal accountable person must submit to the BSR a list of prescribed building information. And this list that you got here looks similar to what they got. So the primary use, materials, roof build up, fire doors, fixtures. I think this part is as far as I can understand it, key building information within 28 days of the submission of the building registration. Now, obviously, if you do have that information at stage 2 and stage 3, then that can only be a good thing, right? Rather than having to try and cobble all that information together at the end.
Yeah, but you also mentioned yesterday about this possible revisions. But if you submit something once, you want to update the same information rather than send separate information. So somehow we need to represent this. Let's check it first and then see what we can do.
And I think the only other thing was whether there's something to check with George and the other team is does this list here actually represent the regulation 38? Now, Jarek, you may know whether actually does regulation 38 pick up on all of these things, or is this different to the regulation 38 sort of fire information requirement for a project? That is the other question I have. Does this so they refer to this as the prescribed building information is how this list is referred to as. So rather than the key building information, they note that it's been the list of prescribed building information. Maybe we just change the key building information to prescribed building information.
I added that comment and then we will check.
Perfect. So yeah, my understanding is that at Gateway 1, the main change here is when you're submitting a planning application is you're going to do the fire statement. And the other question is the Gateway 1 sort of sits outside of the gateway process in terms of Building Safety Act. Do all projects have to have a fire statement? That's a question. So even if it's not a high risk building or project, do you still now need to get submit this fire statement? My experiences on a couple of smaller projects that we've done is yes, we do. But again, it'll be good to just get that question clarified with input. And I think my understanding is that there is this sort of 21 days to kind of come back as part of this consultation process during the planning. So once we've gone through Gateway 1, for Gateway 2, these are the questions again that we have. So Gateway 2 is this sort of hard stop. Now there are documentation which talks about the fact that you could submit a piece of information and you've got to get that approved before you start that particular piece of work on site.
Sorry, Daz. I just noticed Paul have his hand raised probably for a while.
Sorry, thank you. Just going back to the list just above there.
Yeah, this one here. Yeah.
Yeah, you've not really got compartmentation on there, and the compartmentation and the space risks need
Okay.
to go there, because you can't really select some of the things like fire dampers, smoke control dampers, etc., without
Okay.
knowing what walls they're going to go through.
So that's broadly speaking, essentially understand the compartmental and the compartmentation of the building in plan, section, and elevation, etc.
But it's not just the compartmentation, it's what you're going to use. So is it going to be block work? Is it going to be partition wall? What type of partition wall is it going to be? Is it going to be single skin, double skin, quadruple skin if you've got 2 layers of board? And because you can't select some of the other products. And certainly, for instance, there's issues with the penetration seals, even with pipes and cables. If they're either in the wrong place, the holes are the wrong size, and you don't know through which compartment construction they're going through. And I think we probably need to have that, because you can't then select some of the, you can't select some of the penetration seals for pipes and cables. Potentially you can't select the doors, potentially you can't select the fire dampers if you don't know what they are. And I'm fairly certain that during the next stage, they will at least be a minor thing that you would have to put back up. And if we're not careful, we'll end up with 6-week delays, etc. Or delays right at the end when somebody's done something that they shouldn't have done.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Now, Paul, in terms of my initial kind of thing, this list, like I said, from the information that Mo sent yesterday, this seems to be the list that's required post registration. Not saying obviously we don't need to know this to get to Gateway 2.
Oh, right. Sorry, I've got confused. I thought we were at Gateway 2.
No, we are. No. Sorry, there's an open question in terms of, we initially had Jarek and I this list here, but reading this other document that is sort of another kind of a specialist sort of contractors kind of guidance, this key building information is referred to as something that needs to be submitted 28 days from when the building is registered, i.e. after the project is got the building completion certificate.
Yes.
Prior to occupation. But obviously we need to know all of this in before stage 2 as well. But this particular phrase seems to be something that's noted at the end, theoretically speaking, from the guidance. I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but that is what I'm reading at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I think the whole idea generally is Gateway 2, this is what we're going to build, and Gateway
Agreed.
3 matches it because you built what you said you were going to.
And this is why I think, in a way, where Jarek has it is almost correct, and we probably just duplicate it at the end as well, because as I say, you got to know, you got to design, you got to build, and then you got to confirm that all of those 3 things are the same. Now they may change because of some change control, etc. But so maybe there's no harm in leaving that there. But I don't think this level of information necessarily needed for Gateway 1 though. But no. I think it definitely needs for 2. Makes absolute sense for that. And at the end, okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Maybe we should move this in between gateways to make. I think there was
probably better. Yeah, that makes more sense. So I think what we need to check, I guess, is this duration at the 28 days. Again, 28 days when I read it was relating to that you had to, within 28 days of registering the building, to submit this information. So that's a maximum of 28 days. But that was more referring to it's the end of after stage 3. So something we need to just, does that 28 days sit here was at the end? Okay, thank you. So the other questions we had, general questions we have for Gateway 2 is, again, the cost. I think my understanding was that there is a fixed cost for a submission, And then depending on the nature of the works or the project, the BSR have hourly rates that they will apply depending on what the input they need from their multidisciplinary design team. So, for example, if it's a computer and fluid dynamics bit of work that they need to review, so the design team, or let's say the contractor, submit a CFD report. The BSR will also then appoint someone to kind of review that and get their feedback, and that's done on an hourly rate. So I guess there'll be different hourly rates for different specialisms within the building safety regulator side. So what I don't know is, again, a bit like planning, whether there is a cost that's determined by the size of the project, so square meterage, or use, and or both.
Yes.
Again, if anyone's got any links to that, the cost of the submission, that would be really useful. And then again, the only understanding that I had in reading things is that, let's say you do submit the information to get gateway to approval, the building safety regulator has 12 weeks to review and determine it. I think what they generally say is that if you're able to submit information sort of in sort of packages or systems, I guess that makes it easier for them to review and not become a massive bottleneck. But speaking to Jarek yesterday, you can't necessarily have a completed design if you're trying to submit in the sort of traditional tender package sort of scenario. You might submit the GAs, but they haven't necessarily picked up or completed the design for the fire doors landing quite, for example. But as far as I understand it, theoretically, you could submit a set of information and the BSR have 12 weeks. Now, interestingly, I think I read again something which talked about the fact that if they don't complete that review in 12 weeks, it's not that automatically it's approved. Actually, I think it's automatically rejected. So the default is that if the BSR missed their 12 weeks, the scheme is sort of not approved and hasn't got gateway to, which is quite interesting in a way, because yeah, it sort of leaves I guess where they're submitting it in a bit of a limbo, because and I think the BSR are saying, well, if it takes us more than 12 weeks, then the information you're given isn't clear enough or it's we're having to go through it, and you haven't, as the applicant and the client, made it easy for us to understand why your design complies with the regulations. That is how I read the kind of get the statement around that. So I think maybe, Jarek, what we need to do is maybe do a little thing about, again, I'll have a look at the information that Mo sent, but it was sort of saying that after 12 weeks, if they don't respond, that's not actually an immediate sort of approval, it's actually a rejection. It's a bit like the party walls, actually, where if someone doesn't respond, it's not actually that, it actually goes into dispute.
That would be good to show as a process. So
exactly. So the consequences of that thing. So then, in terms of what do we need to submit? So we had here, what information shall be provided, safety critical only or everything? There's the phrase of the sort of functional requirements of a building. My understanding is that pretty much you have to submit the information. Now, I've not gone through this process, but the way I'm understanding it is that you submit information, like I guess a package of drawings for the BSR. But my understanding is that we have to kind of create almost little file notes or technical notes in front of that package of information to say, look, we think the staircase is compliant because we've looked at building regulation B in terms of fire, M accessibility, K in terms of risk of falling, and we have designed it so that it meets those things by making it a particular width. The treads and the rises are correct, and the balustrade is correct. So that is what I'm imagining we would have to do as designers collectively with the rest of the team is to say, why do we think that our submission and our design is compliant? And then it talks about, as Jarek was pointing out, the Schedule 1 from A to Z of the building regs, which the HSE in their webinars talk about, look, we haven't changed the technical requirements of the submission. What we have changed is the process. So, they talked about a building built last year. If that follow the building regs, then it should be the same for now. But the process is obviously very different. That's what they were highlighting in this webinar that I watched. And I'll share that HSE website link that I was sharing with Jarek yesterday as well. It's a good set of webinars because you're kind of hearing from the horse's mouth. So yeah, I think it'll be useful to kind of understand, people have submitted information already for any sort of gateway 2. How did they present it? My feeling is that you would need to kind of give a narrative as to why your design complies. The building control, the BSR are not there to spot mistakes. They're there just to kind of read it and approve and take a view on it. The other thing that I understand is that I think actually this thing here, Jarek, is after Gateway 2. So this building control notices. So once you've submitted all the information, I've got Gateway 2 approval, then this notice has to go off, noticing of starting on site. So what I was again reading yesterday was that for a high risk building, you had to give 5 days before starting on site notice to building safety regulator. So I guess that they can kind of mobilize their team to come to visit site, for example. Now the definition of starting and commencement is quite specific. As I understanding, the starting date is not about stripping out or demolition, but it's when you're actually putting things back. So maybe building the kind of foundations or building the kind of walls or party walls and stuff. So that's when you're that's the starting date, and the commencement date. Again, you had to give prior notice of that. Is when you got to again. This is a very short précis, but they talk about kind of completing the lowest floor slab, or 15% of the refurbishment works, not in cost, but in terms of actual physical work. So starting date is different to commencement date. And again, the regulation requires you to give notice to that to the BSR. Now, the reality is these dates will potentially could slip in a project. You anticipate completing something by this date and it doesn't. So do you had to keep on, I guess, going back to the regulator to kind of inform them? But yeah, my understanding is that this element of notifying them of the starting commencement is after you got your gateway to approval. Couple of other general things is principal contractor change control requirements. I think there is guidance on this. Again, Jarek, when I read Mo's document, it went into a bit more detail about what is needed in here. So I think maybe we can have a look at that and add some general bullet points, and maybe there's another link. But again, what we're trying to do in this diagram is not necessarily to write down everything, but to give, I guess, the correct summary headlines, and as Jarek has done before, provide the hyperlinks to enable people to read the government or the HSE. So we're only giving links to either the government websites or the HSE. We feel that they've got to be the most accurate. So this change control process comes up to this one here. Again, as far as we understand it, you can, there is the opportunity to potentially change things, whether because, I don't know, maybe the manufacturer has gone bust, or actually because you do want to change a product around. But our understanding is that there is two things: notifiable change. That could be about, for example, and again, there is a list of what these things notifiable changes could be. And they are, for example, something to do with the change of the process. So the way that you talked about managing change control as a contractor, maybe you changed that document. So you need to notify the BSR of that. So the notified changes seems to be very much about changes to processes and stuff. Or it could be a change to a product, but that has exactly the same performance and specification. Now I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, I guess, because nothing can be truly equal. But the notifiable change is, again, as far as I understand it, you can proceed at risk. So the contractor can go, okay, we're going to change the product or change a process, but you're allowed to carry on. And then but you obviously submit that to the BSR, and they have this 10-day period, as far as we understand it, to kind of say, yes, that's happy, or no. So you are proceeding at risk, but theoretically, if you're sticking within the guidelines of what a notifiable change can be, then you shouldn't fall foul of that. However, if you're changing something major, obvious things, compartmental lines, staircase widths, corridor widths, passive or active fire detection or suppression systems, something along that line is a major change, and you cannot proceed at risk till you've got approval again. So this is a major change, is pretty much going back to the position you would be when you submit that information to get Gateway 2 approval. So they're the two, and I don't know, actually one thing I haven't put in here, I guess, Jarek, is what the cost of these things are again. Is there a fixed fee for a major and a notifiable? Or again, is it a bit like the main submission where there could be hourly rates that are applied to it? So I think that's a question that I think we've got that here, and it costs an exact definition. So again, if anyone's got any feedback or input about some sort of cost matrix, so that clients, contractors can build that into their program. And then as we get to the end, again, a couple of more questions here are to do with sort of the need for as-built information. Now, from an architectural point of view, for example, or an M&E point of view, that's obviously very different to what some people used to do in terms of we would issue maybe final record, because we haven't gone to inspect everything that's been built and measured everything to make sure it's been built as per our drawings. So that's a bit of an unknown purely from an architectural point of view. How does the architect go and check that their drawings, that the version of the drawings that they have is the as-built information? Normally we would ask the contractor to kind of mark up any known changes that we hadn't been notified of before. Theoretically, if something has changed from submission 2, they should go through the change procedure. There may be a variation to amend something, and therefore we would update our Revit model. And so when you get to the end of Gateway 2, what we have as on our record should be the as-built. So in one way, it should be there shouldn't really be a major issue. But I'm just conscious that at the moment, we ask sort of specialist contractors, is our drawings as you built it? And they say yes, but then we might turn up and have a look on site and something changed. So that kind of inspection role that I think some appointments used to have, maybe we need to bring some of that back in. So that'll be quite interesting to see what people's experience of that is. Being that building regulation 38 fire safety information, which is not a new thing, it's something that's always been there, but obviously George mentioned about the processes that they're putting in place at Active Plan, and I think there's another gentleman who talked about it from a housing association about how they're looking to compile all of that relevant information. Obviously, we asked the question whether Regulation 38 is actually based on that list above as well. And then there is this need from a contractor point to do with things like mandatory occurrence reporting. So if something doesn't go right, that reporting is required. So people reference things like the airline industry where if you notice something wrong or you did something wrong, my understanding is that you have a 10-day period where you can report that you've done something wrong and you don't get prosecuted or anything. But it could be like, look, the control button on my airplane was eroded, so I didn't see it properly. And the aim of that sort of no blame culture within that short period, the idea is that people report those things more frequently and therefore improve. If they make sure that that knob that they had to use on the airplane is better painted or finished so that it doesn't rub off, and you might need a different color. So I think that's kind of that behavioral change that the building safety regulation and the competency has added. It's not about just skills, knowledge, experience, it's behavioral change as well. So that's I think quite an interesting, big one. So yeah, as far as I understand it, you've got to, simply speaking, we've got to make sure that we've designed the building with all the relevant parties, which is a procurement difference to what is now predominantly. We submit that to the approval, get it approved. There are processes for changing, but theoretically, ideally, you don't want to do it if you don't need to. And at the end of the building, you're able to kind of submit for that to get the gateway through. So the building safety regulator will agree with the contractor inspection dates as they would do normally now, or maybe even sort of unnotified inspections as well. And so all of that comes together. Then we get to gateway three. And our understanding is that so practical completion, we got to apply for this the completion certificate. And which could take 12 weeks. Again, wasn't 100% sure whether that's right or whether it's 8 weeks now. I've sort of seen both written. So again, this is about building in these time periods into the program. So I guess if you could, one thing we haven't put in here, Jarek, is like just making sure we all understand what we need to submit. My understanding is this sort of safety case, all of the kind of that the list that we talked about above. So this list, the key building information list. So all of that needs to be, and there are, again, in Mo's document, there was some really useful bullet points about you had to write a statement to say, yes, as the kind of client and the team, you have had competent people do everything as per this document and drawings and stuff. So I think we can expand a little bit on this from Mo's submission feedback. But ultimately, my understanding is that you're kind of reconfirming that you followed all the processes that are required to be followed in Gateway 2. You're confirming that everything's been built as per the documents that you had already submitted and got approval through the Gateway 2 process. And in doing so, you kind of get practical completion, and then you apply for the completion certificate. Once you've got that completion certificate, then the high risk building can be registered with the BSR. Again, we had a period of 3 weeks previously, and I don't know if that's changed. But the key thing is that only when you've got that certificate or registered the building, can you then occupy it. So we've tried to kind of put that in this workflow here. We've got Gateway 3 completion, building project completion, register with the HRB with the BSR, and then it can be occupied. So that's quite important in terms of clients thinking, oh, we've got practical completion. In the old days, there might be, we might have had some de minimis snags that we want to finish, etc. Or there's a bit of information left that we'll send next week. Obviously, all of that cannot happen anymore. And we've also got the added sort of stage in terms of registration. So this, as far as we understand at the moment, could be 15 weeks. That's nearly 4 months. But again, my understanding is that you don't have to wait to the last day to submit information. You can submit it, in sort of smaller chunks, I guess, because theoretically, I don't know, I'm thinking aloud. the foundation designs or the structural frame information will be long sort of solidified and completed before you get to the end of the project, because the superstructure would have gone up. So that information should be able to be confirmed, collated and submitted way before the end of the project. However, things like, I don't know, commissioning of the fire alarm system or, emergency lighting, lift, all that kind of stuff will obviously have to happen quite close to the end. So again, that kind of phase submission, I think, can occur to stop having to, finish a project, wait potentially 4 months before you can occupy it. So that again is something that the client and everyone needs to be aware of. If you're selling private flats, you can't say to the owners, "Oh, you can move in on PC day," because actually you've actually got to wait another 4 more months. So that's quite a huge difference to, I guess, what currently happens at the moment. And finally, our understanding is that it has to be sort of recertified every 5 years, and therefore you kind of come back to that earlier thing that Jarek had about, maintaining that. Well, actually, you've got some additional ones in here as well. Maintaining that information, going back to the model, the EIRs, the OIRs, etc., and you're starting a new project, I guess. So keeping that asset information alive, which is, I guess, all the things that George has talked about in more detail, with, for example, the active plan platform and other methods that people follow. So have I missed anything? I think that therefore then gets you to the end of, and you can actually use the building. The defects liability period, I think that's a new thing of the kind of 30 years and the 15 years. Again, I'm slightly less fully knowledgeable about that, so others will have to kind of input into that. But that is currently how and any input from the team. I think it's better to kind of get it out there with questions highlighted so people can feed back to like a PDF version of this.
But it will be useful if we could get some more comments first and
Agreed.
then publish it.
Yeah. So if anyone's got any feedback on that, so that's currently where we are, I think. Have I missed anything, Jarek, or?
No, I think you covered it all very well. I just wanted to add, in the link in the chat, I sent a link to this Miro board and a password to it that will allow you to see and comment without having any account with Miro. And so if you select, let's just try to demonstrate that. If you select one object, the right click, you should be able to add comment.
Yeah,
that's it. So if you click that, you make a comment and then you have to publish. So you have to press that arrow, the blue arrow at the end. Otherwise, it will not be visible. By
mistake before where I just put it in and you couldn't see anything, so I had to press that.
Yeah.
And then then you should be able to see that, I guess.
Yeah, and if you do this, well, if you're not logged in, if you want your contribution as your name to be visible, just put your initials or name, because otherwise you're just a visitor. But all of those comments are logged and they don't disappear. So let me just try to show you. If I turn them on. So I now switched on resolved, and you should be able to see in a sec a few more pointers appearing on your screen. Or maybe as a visitor you can't see, but there's quite a lot of resolved comments, and they don't disappear. So we can track basically your input. And
do you want to share your
yeah,
screen, Jarek, to show that? Because that might be just so everyone can
let's
see
do that.
Stop sharing.
Okay, so all the comments are here. They are tracked And then if I go show resolved, you will then see all those dashes, so people made comments.
Brilliant.
So that will be quite useful if you did it online. But if you prefer to do it any other way, you know, text message, email, or whatever, that will be handy. Any comments and input you can provide that will make this workflow much better and help everyone.
Yeah,
Do
so that's kind of where we are at the moment. I don't know if anyone's got any initial things. Like I said, I think the key thing that we want to do is to get the kind of critical bits of headline information correct. Obviously, get the kind of workflow correct. I think that top part is pretty correct. You know, I'm saying pretty correct for everything because none of us have really, I've personally not gone through the process, but based on the readings that we've done and the feedback, that top part is correct. And then the aim really is to try and give some that high level information on this diagram with the supplementary links to do further detailed reading because of a particular complicated project or a scenario. So we don't want to get too wordy, but just to enable people to make that initial workflow check and get an understanding, and then sort of delve in deeper if need be. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, open to any initial thoughts or queries or comments or input from the floor.
I'll just make one comment additional, if I can. So if any of you knows about business process modeling notation, BPMN, which we're using the symbols, and that's how we want to present this workflow. And if you can make comments in regards to whether we've used the correct gateways and whether the logic is there, that would be appreciated as well.
And that's if you pan to the left, please, Jarek. That's these gateway descriptions. So what you've done is use the symbols from that sort of system or that sort of method, whatever. Yeah. And then you got the kind of thing. So yeah, it's just making sure that, and then the aim here is to include the relevant ones that we have used in a little legend at the top of the workflow. So people aren't having to guess what that symbol is, but not all of these symbols we're using or need to use. So we've left it to the left-hand side for the time being, but hopefully you can pan and read the what that symbol means and make sure that makes sense, and then take it from there.
And just to clarify, when that said legend, he didn't mean me. I had to do it.
Well, look, I don't know if maybe sort of if people need to digest it, I'm sure it'll be good. But as you have already done, a lot of people have contributed and kind of commented, which is fantastic, because it's definitely people who are going to be more specifically knowledgeable about it and have gone through it in real life experiences. So that's the kind of thing. But we don't also want to kind of keep it sort of virtual for too long, because the transitional period ended on the 6th of April. I think we're looking to, I don't think any later than next week, Jarek, will issue the whatever feedback we have or haven't got. We'll issue it maybe, I don't know, middle of next week or something. Otherwise, we're kind of going. I think it's a nice time because the transitional period has finished. The kind of it makes sense to issue it now. So yeah, if you can provide any comments in the next sort of couple of days or early next week, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll kind of use what we have, put some things as TBC and get it out there. If that works for you as well, Jarek, maybe we'll do another session.
Yeah, so let's say if we get comments till next week, Tuesday, we will then try to have it ready by end of the week. Will that work for you?
That works for me in terms of another catch up. Yeah, perfect. And I guess Richard and Jess, if you could reshare that link to the whole community, that'd be great, because then you know, we're kind of spreading that out a bit more and getting as much coverage as we can.
Yeah,
Apart from
sure.
that, I think we are at the at the end.
That's it.
So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and yeah, we'll get it out, and yeah, as most things, experience will bring clarity on this, hopefully. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Right stuff. Thank you very much.